So, thank you for joining us today. I'm so glad to see those who have already joined us and those who will join us, I'm sure, in the minutes to come. I'm Denise Wiseman. I'm in the core group of the Healthcare Reinvention Collaborative. Our other core members on the call today are Paul Burens and Wael Sansun. I don't see our other members yet, but I'm sure that Jennifer will be joining us soon. And Dawn is on vacation, and I'm so proud of her for really being on vacation and disconnected. Today, we are fortunate to be shining a light on the work of a couple of our network members. I'm going to introduce them here in a moment. You will recall that our mission is to identify, connect, support, and illuminate every healthcare changemaker. And if you know me well, I call them ruckus makers. I think that they are positive deviants, and I love shining a light on them. We're really excited to be shining a light on our two guests in this month's Shine a Light event. They will be given approximately 10 minutes each to describe their work, and then they will do two key things. They're going to ask for what they need from the community and offer what they can to the community. While they are informing us of their work, please feel free to let them know what you can offer them as well as what they might offer you in the chat. I want to make sure that we have time to get to both of our guests and then have a rich conversation. So we will shine a light on one, do their full 10 minutes, and then we'll go immediately to our next guest. Once we're done with that and everybody's been able to contribute, we will then open it up to open participation. So that's when we'll actually take questions for our two guests. I know that can feel a little bit stifling, but we really want to make sure that both get their full opportunity before we open up to dialogue. So hold those questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Paul's mailing it, so he'll be able to let us know if we have some questions. All right. So if we're ready, I'm going to introduce our first guest. So Rosanna Galindo is a data communications coach and patient experience advocate with over 30 years of experience in nonprofit volunteer administration, 16 of which were at a Plaintree designated hospital where she helped to lead significant patient experience improvement. Currently, she runs her own data storytelling learning and development company to help leaders empower themselves to communicate more effectively with data. Her work integrates business analysis and communication to help organizations achieve measurable outcomes. Rosanna, please tell us a little bit about your work.
Thank you so much, Denise. I really appreciate your introduction of me. Always, when people introduce me, I'm always like, gosh, it sounds like somebody I want to meet. As Denise said, I have a data storytelling company. My name is Rosanna Galindo. I am a certified business analyst. I'm a faculty member in communication, and I am a former patient experience professional at a hospital where I worked for 16 years, helping to lead that patient experience charge. I have returned to really teaching communication and really focused on helping people, specifically in healthcare and nonprofits, but there's that subsection of where they happen together to find and communicate the story and the data more effectively. What I have found is data is intimidating to some people, and we know we're awash in data. Healthcare, like every ecosystem, is inundated with data. And we don't tend to move people. I like to say numbers numb, stories resonate. So data alone is a piece of evidence. It supports ideas, but it doesn't generally move people to decision making. It doesn't move people to act. Stories people tend to find meaningful. Stories affect our limbic system. Stories, which is kind of where that decision making comes from. So connecting data to story so that we can move the needle in healthcare. That's been my passion, is helping people become more confident with how they both analyze as well as share data, because ultimately data storytelling essentials has several parts. So I've created a training material that I call Data Storytelling Essentials. I'm a big fan of practical tools. It is not meant to be a comprehensive deep dive into all aspects of data storytelling. And there are some great resources out there, some excellent resources that really dive deep into the pre-attentive attributes of design and really how that is happening within data storytelling. I know I'm dealing with a lot of people, professionals out in the work world, who want the skill sets and want practical tools that they can begin using right away. So I kind of provide a broader brushstroke. People can always deep dive into any of these areas. So with Data Storytelling Essentials, my goal is to create practical, brief and breezy, but very dense and meaty training. So you can say a lot with a concision of words, right? You can say a lot with very little. So that's my goal, is to try to really give people tools. So right now I have data storytelling Essentials visualization, which is really creating visual charts and graphs from your data. I have narrative, which is then adding on that storytelling component. How do you take your audience on a storytelling journey using a story arc? Because stories have a beginning, middle, and an end. So narrative. And right now I'm working on the data communication planning piece. There's ultimately 6 modules. So what you see here is a part of my I have on demand. So I have some booklets I created. There's a picture of me with both the data visualization and data narrative booklets. I give those out in in-person training. So I do training. I do learning and development on this. I've been doing association trainings where I'll go and do the training, and then the participants, as an add-on, as a plus to my in-person trainings, people have the booklet or the code to get the booklet training and follow-up, because I have on-demand training. Denise has been to both my in-person and done my on-demand training and gave me great feedback to actually help, shore that up and tighten that up. And so I like the idea of having sustained learning. And so I know as a conference attendee, I would go perhaps be exposed to great content and then go to use it several months later and kind of forget some of the component essentials. So that's why I actually created initially the on-demand training. They are completely on their own, dense trainings, about 90 minutes. You go through training on visualization and training on narrative, but they also can complement in-person or virtual training. Ultimately, there are 6 modules that I teach from. Only 2 are currently on demand, but the third one's in process right now. So visualization and narrative, communication planning, which really takes in audience and purpose, because all effective communication is audience centric. And so it really is the first thing one should really learn with data storytelling, but people always want to go straight to the visualization narrative because it's kind of the sexy and fun part of it. But you really need to take into account the audience. Why are you even talking? What's your goal? And then you have to take into account the culture. For everything from democratizing the data, your access to it, to your audience's reception and familiarity and trust of your data, your own data savviness, right? Your own just understanding central tendencies, samples, population size, just really being able to ask the right questions of the data and knowing how to extract data confidently. And then, of course, the actual presentation, basic public speaking skills. So all those together, though, make up what I call data storytelling essentials. And I provide these services on my website. So I'm doing what do I have to offer the community? I have data communication training. I have coaching and training. I do that through my website. I have a blog where I provide fairly dense articles that are really good teaching tips. Almost all of them come from a lecture or a lesson plan or something that I've done in my life. And so it comes from a different aspect. But I give tools and practical tips for a variety of things. I have a toolbox that's a growing collection of materials to help people create data stories, including an infographic gallery with quick, easy reminders. I have a data story lab I'm doing once a month. It's a drop-in so people can get help with their data story. It is right now. It's going to be open to my members of my website fairly soon because I do limit it. I can only limit it to 12 people because there's only so much you can do to talk about. I don't want the group to be too big. I have, for this Shine a Light, I created an HTC summer sale on the data visualization components. My on-demand program, which comes with a downloadable PDF of the booklet, and it has an interactive exercise in the training and so forth. It will take you through the principles of data visualization. So if you join the HTC, that's in the marketplace, and that's something I can offer you, is that communication training and a sample of my teaching style and experience. And I'm building my website. There's going to be more webinars, more resources. And that's really my goal, is to kind of have a series of data communication tools that are grab and go that people can use that immediately accessible. So what do I need from the community? Get the word out. If you build it, they will come, but they're coming slowly. So they were coming, but I'm a one-person show, a one-woman show. I'm a solopreneur, and I do have, I teach my classes at the college and do some work. So things move a little slower than I would like in terms of marketing. I'm more of a content creator than I am a marketer, and so I would love to get more people familiar with my services and my product. Words from Denise really encourage me because I know Denise is a fan of it, and Denise really has found value in it. And other people, I get good feedback when I'm at conferences. I get, people who really enjoy it, but I just need to get it out there to more people. So what I can need from the community is, follow me on LinkedIn, share my blog articles. If you find one interesting about data storytelling, that you would share it and that you found it valuable. I encourage you to, tag me in posts that have to do with data in healthcare. That's how I met Denise. Denise had mentioned something. It was when Epic and Press Ganey merged, right? And I was like, wow, that says a lot. And there's some data potential conflicts of interest. But anyway, that really, and then I tagged her, and then we ended up having a relationship. And so I really realized that's really an important piece of that whole part. So, that just brings me an awareness to another audience of your network that may be interested in data storytelling, that may find interest in my content. So that's helpful. That's what I need from the community, is awareness. Backlinks. If you have a website, and I'm happy to be reciprocal, if you find value in my product, which is really why I want you to sample my services, to take the data visualization on demand class, to come to a drop-in data story lab, because then you can honestly and authentically say, hey, that was valuable. I found that really helpful. And then share those words with me, because I've been terrible at capturing testimony. And I need to do more of that. Like I said, I'm not great at the digital marketing piece. So I've built something, and I need them to come. And I'm just looking for guest bloggers. If you like to talk about data, I would love to expand the platform that I do have and bring in more people. I do have a growing audience within my website, but it could just move a little quicker. So that's what I have to offer. And I just want to get the word out to people who would like to have that service, because I'm really doing executive coaching with people one-to-one, training in context of organizational or associations and conferences. So that's really my goal. And then on demand. I think that's it for me, Denise.
Fantastic. Rosanna, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. There was a lot packed into your little segment, so I'm really excited to be able to share that through the video that we will create following this. So I will remove the spotlight and spotlight Sam. All right. So Sam Kojan is a healthcare entrepreneur and former internal medicine resident who develops innovative claims analytics software while actively seeking to acquire and revitalize struggling rural hospitals. He specializes in collaborative decision-making processes and communication techniques drawn from high-stakes negotiation, with a focus on removing artificial barriers that prevent healthcare teams from delivering optimal patient care. Sam mentors healthcare professionals in career transitions and is passionate about creating transparent, physician-led healthcare environments. Sam, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share.
Thanks, Denise. I appreciate that. So what I'm all about, and my company is all about, is really transforming hospitals and rebuilding trust with the patients, with us. There's a crisis today because it all comes down to patient care. And again, because we're all patients, it impacts all of us. So if any one of us had a loved one in the hospital today, would we neatly trust they're receiving the most effective, safest, and most compassionate care possible, especially without going broke? So currently, the field has a lot of misaligned incentives, which cause staff burnout. When I talk with doctors, they feel like they're just RVU machines, just there to, in essence, collect the RVUs and as many as they can. And because the administration or the way that the hospitals run or their circumstances around the hospital really kind of mandate that they do that, or I feel that way. Patient experience kind of becomes an afterthought in this environment. And there's always a sense of financial urgency. And that takes precedent over care quality. So my partners and I, our mission is to operate and transform hospitals into national leaders in quality of care, infections, medical mistakes, patient and staff experience, and access to an affordability of care. When it comes to rural hospitals, especially, many of them are vital to their communities, and their decline is often preventable. So our goal is to really help stabilize and revitalize these institutions to help them thrive and help their communities thrive. We operate on three fronts. We level the playing field for hospitals with a rapid payer audit, in essence, where we look at 12 months worth of claims, and it takes us just about a day to really turn that around. And we're able to show the hospitals their denied and underpaid claims all in one place under different reports. And also we tell them what they can do about them. So it's not just, hey, here's a list of claims, good luck. It's actually, hey, here are some actionable ways you can modify these claims to actually resubmit them and get paid. We also provide hospital operations consulting. And our ultimate goal is to acquire hospitals, or at the very least, we don't have to necessarily acquire them. Our goal is to operate them, which in many cases might mean acquisition. When we are looking at acquiring hospitals, we're looking to acquire those who are either at the risk of closing or are closed already, or just standing empty. Why are we looking to do that? Well, we want to create the best damn healthcare system anyone's ever seen, because we're all patients. And you might be asking, okay, well, there's a lot of different people buying hospitals out there. What separates you from anyone else? Our goal is to focus on quality and experience. So to do that, we want to overhaul the clinical processes and culture that kind of permeate the current environment. There's no transparency currently. A lot of hospitals in general are very opaque, and hospital decision-making is also pretty opaque. So we want to kind of open that up and make it more transparent and collaborative, as well as decentralize the decision-making and kind of provide more power to the doctors and nurses and staff who are on the front lines. To do that, we're also giving them tools like theory of constraints, Lean, and Six Sigma, as well as a flattened organizational structure to make it all possible. In addition to all those things, we're also looking to use our software to eliminate denied and underpaid claims to provide more revenue for the hospitals and instill a culture of collaboration with active listening, empathy, and compassion. So what we need from the community is, if you know of hospitals that are open to new ownership before they're forced to close, or before they get into a crisis where they don't see a way out, we can help them at the very least increase their revenue by getting them lowering their AER from some of them are like months or half a year. We can lower that AER to just weeks and get them more cash flow, as well as get them all help them recover their denied and underpaid claims. We're also looking for healthcare professionals who are aligned with our collaborative model, and investors who would want to help be part of a healthcare system that we're trying to build with purchasing hospitals, and especially those who take a longer view on return on investment and aren't just doing it to make profit, but are actually bought into making healthcare for everyone better. We're also happy to meet operational experts in theory of constraints and similar fields, and those who are willing to learn those techniques. What I can offer is a platform to talk about what you're passionate about. If you're a healthcare leader, a hospital leader who wants to spread the word about what you're doing at your hospital or organization to help change the healthcare system or strengthen the community where you are, I'd love to have you on my podcast and talk about that. I can also provide mentorship for healthcare professionals in transition, communication and negotiation training with things like the Black Swan communication method, and also talk about techniques to enhance team dynamics and patient care. Thank you so much.
I just loved hearing from both of you. And just to let others know, of course, Sam and Rosanna joined me 15 minutes before the event, and we were talking, and we were deep into, there was so much that we were going to be discussing, had discussed there, and I think we will continue those discussions here. But right now, it's the opportunity to open up the mic for everyone and let you ask questions of Rosanna and Sam. What would you like to know more about what they've shared or what they're doing? And as always, I already have questions, but I'll try to be quiet.
So, Sam, what part of the world are you working in the most? What region of the country are you in?
Yeah, great question. So I'm in Columbus, Ohio. But we have a national reach. So as far as working with hospitals, for instance, on claims denials or underpayments, we work with hospitals anywhere in the country. And as far as like hospital acquisition, mostly looking in the Midwest, but very open to other regions as well.
Perfect. I'm in the Eastern Washington region in a very rural area with a couple of hospitals that are struggling. So
Where at, Gary? Both Paul and I are Washington State as well.
Exactly.
So I'm in Oroville. If you know where OMAC is, I'm right up smack against the Canadian border.
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
Aren't you in the Confluence catchment area then?
Yep.
Yeah. I grew up in Pullman, so just south of you.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
It's down over there.
So glad you joined us today.
Yeah.
So Gary, it sounds like there's you have a connection to these hospitals there, or?
It's the only real healthcare in the area. There's a couple of clinics, but if you want to get, if there's anything major that you need to do, you got to leave the area to go have it done. So we have our little Tonasket hospital that I want to say is a 5-bed hospital, and then it has a long-term care that's attached to it. So they're mostly a stabilize and ship kind of a place, but I know that they struggle quite a bit. So.
And Gary, do you work within healthcare, or you're just passionate about the healthcare in your location?
I managed cath labs for Multicare for a number of years before we decided to go rural, and I actually transitioned into financial services. But Denise, you've been on my LinkedIn contact list for years, and this popped up, and I thought I'm going to go see what Denise is doing.
Awesome. So glad you did. Sam, I was really curious, why rural health? Why are you passionate about rural health?
Rural health these days, I think, is the system, the way it's designed currently, and this is just in part just because of changing demographics and so on over the past few decades, it's kind of getting the short end of the stick as far as reimbursements and just a large portion of the country lives there, and yet the financial, I guess, structure and the reimbursement structure as well as legal structure hasn't really caught up with that. Hasn't kind of caught up with the changing demographics and just overall the needs of the people. So to add to that, because of a lot of these hospitals there are closing, or at the very least are reducing the number of services they offer, that hurts a large number of the population. So it just seems like there's not a big enough voice to actually help protect people in these areas. And again, because we're all patients, kind of it seems like it's kind of the weakest part of the healthcare system, or the very least the one that's least, I guess, protected or at most risk of going under. And but it doesn't have to be that way. So I feel like if I'm able to show that we can change that to actually strengthen it and strengthen the communities there, that if we can do it there, we can do it anywhere, including cities and big systems, etc.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I'm very concerned about rural care, just because that's a foundation, right, for any society, is access to care, treatment when you're in crisis, or just to help you maintain your health. There's a group of us currently doing a free course offered by Harvard on the public value, I think is what it's called. I'm looking at Jennifer. She's kind of leading us in that. But in the first module, they shared the UN manifesto or declaration, whatever it is. And in that very first section, it's talking about the basic that every person should have access to. And of course, listed there is healthcare. But our society doesn't have that. So and our rural communities are losing that. And it just really concerns me.
Yeah. And the interesting part is it doesn't have to be that way. There's nothing that says rural healthcare can't have, access to the best care available or the best care possible. It's just the way that the rural hospitals also find themselves at a kind of a losing side of things, because they don't have the same resources, financial resources, as larger systems do, where they can buy certain software or services, etc. And that's what we're trying to help change as well, with access to things that we've created for that can help large systems, but also especially work for smaller systems as well. And they don't cost an arm and a leg. And so they allow them to really get the benefit of less denied claims, like Medicare Advantage for rural hospitals. And then they end up reversing 90% of that. But then it takes the hospital about $200 per claim on average to actually challenge that. So, while the claims are reversed, that's great. But then in the process, they spend thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars more just to get claims approved that should have been approved to begin with.
Yeah. There's so many underlying processes that neither the patient or the caregiver may be aware of, but are overcomplicating our healthcare system and costing a fortune. Rosanna, one of the questions I wrote down, asking the right questions of data. One of the things that frustrates me greatly, and an organization I follow has done this, and it frustrates me when they share data and they share, they share a chart and they're showing this, from 20 to 30 so that the lines look like they're significant. And I'm like, you're making the data look good. And so when I say asking the right questions of the data, it's twofold. One, the individual who's looking at the data and sharing the data, asking to say, okay, so this looks great because I played with the side panel to get those bars, but what is this really telling me? And two, the person looking at it, what is this really telling me? Because to me, we're almost falsifying the data. We're making it look more significant or relevant than perhaps it is. And so I'm just curious, as I bring that up, what types of things you think about as you share, how should we look at the data? And perhaps there's some honesty and authenticity in how we should look at the data, ask questions of the data, and then share it. Oops, you're on mute. Sorry.
That's a great question. Yeah, because anybody can manipulate the data, but if you're data savvy enough to know the right questions and what to look for, you can catch those things. So something like a zero x-axis, it's incredibly important to have a zero x-axis, right? And that you don't start your axis unless there's a reason why everything starts at a benchmark of a higher level, but then you explain that and it's known with that data. But most data is going to start at zero. And so if you don't have a zero x, but that's suspect. If there's gaps in your numbers, right, with the line chart, if you start with a year over year or year, and then there's like a 5-year gap or a 2-year gap, right, that can really change. You have to be consistent with your time intervals. So those are things to look for just in general. Then, of course, and I wrote actually a pretty good blog article, I think, it called Ethical Storytelling with Data. Ethical Storytelling with Data got into some of these excess issues. Confirmation bias, the tendency to want to bend the data in favor of our look for conclusion or outcome of what we're looking for. And really the best data stories emerge from an aha, oh, I thought, this was working. And the important thing about that is it probably was, but things change, which is how we get into that terrible cycle of, well, we've always done it this way, right? Because it worked, but things do eventually shift, things do change, and best practices become less so. And the data is the only way to really know when that shift has occurred. So being able to, right, not have confirmation bias, but to go in with an open mind and be able to, and this is where that culture comes into play, how open and honest and authentic can you be with the people that you're reporting it to? And that's going to be a unique question for each individual based on their culture. But sometimes, unfortunately, the people who are asking for the data want you to tickle their ears. And there's, that may be its own problem culturally. But once you go into it with the question, be ready to explore. Even understanding average. I actually am working on a blog post right now with central tendency. I find this with my students in the classroom. And I think that the word average is oftentimes misused, oftentimes purposely to bend a particular story. But a mean average is different than a mode versus median. And it's important to know that too. Simple things like that, sample set and population. But data savvy, I think we can give people data savvy skills we're not talking about deep dive inferential statistics skills, but really just the basic skills we all probably learned at some point, just need to dust them off. So I like to use the term data savvy instead of data literacy. I don't think any business professional out there right now is data illiterate. I think some of them just have a little bit more savvy skills in order to really understand the data that they're getting exploratory wise. And then being able to communicate it in a way that is honest and ethical without the manipulation, but you need to know what you're working with first. It's kind of a long answer to your question with some other information popped in there.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And I think it's okay to look at the data and have that aha, that wow, what we thought was making a difference isn't. That's valuable insight. One, to be able to then ask questions, how come, what's going on, if there's an improvement effort or something that we're working on, or to say, well, that's not working. What do we need to pivot to? Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it can be something simple. I know that in my own experience, we started a patient visitation program that really impacted responsiveness scores on nursing units. Now, we couldn't conclusively support that with the data, but there was a strong enough relationship that we could say, though we couldn't be certain it was causation, we could definitely say that there was a correlation happening. That changed, though, with something as simple as leadership change on the unit, right? But because I was able to track the data on the regular with regard to what was happening, it made me question, right? Don't assume that one shift and then, having to backtrack and do a root cause analysis of why did it change? So yeah, whether you're doing, and then sometimes the converse can happen, right? You stumble upon an aha and something is working. You're like, what are we doing? What are we doing to make that change? Let's figure that out because something's happening there. And that's where data can be a superpower, right? It's not the end all be all. We have years of experience. You've got to use your gut instinct, intellect, and all the gifted skills that we have. But data can be a superpower to validate what you know is accurate.
You guys are me of what I learned as a medical director about doctors and how to motivate them.
Mhm.
Data doesn't necessarily do anything until you tell the doctors that half of them are below average. Boy, does that ever motivate them. And think about it for 2 seconds, but you can move the whole average by letting the half that are below average know that they are. And I just popping out of my head, but another little factoid. You want to change one thing in a system with a bunch of doctors, you tell the doctors to do it, and absolutely nothing happens. You give the same task to the medical assistant, and you get 100% adherence in no time. The docs just want to be docs. They don't want to change any of the other stuff. But the MAs want to do their job perfectly correctly. It's
But you bring up a good job. You bring up a good point about telling the telepath, because really now you're telling a story,
yes.
right?
And,
So this, if you can tell a story, people are much more likely to get their attention.
So here's a connection that popped into my head between you two presenters. Here's Sam talking about rural hospitals. Here's Rosanna talking about data presentation. And I'm well aware of a guy who is like the data guru on rural hospitals named Robert Bowman.
Mhm.
He's a family doc down in Arizona. His presentation of the data is what shall I say? Consistent would be a polite word because it's always the same. And he's not telling a narrative.
Ah.
He writes a paragraph and it's the same one over and over. No one argues with him, but I don't know that anything changes either because he doesn't know what you know, Rosanna. I'd love to connect you two and say, can I show you how to really present your data so that people might listen? And Sam, I'd like you to connect to him because he probably knows every struggling rural hospital in the United States. And he might even know who's there. I don't know. But there are people who know things, right? And we need to find a way to connect them to people who know other things that are relevant. And here we are, rural hospitals, 40% of the population of the United States, struggling. And now we see that, if the big, beautiful bill passes, several hundred of them are going to go broke. We're living in a chaotic world that can't predict the future. And we're all struggling to find new ways to connect, new ideas, maybe old ideas newly presented, and making new connections because that's how you make a new system.
And Sam, you had shared that you analyze the data for some of the hospitals that you're working with when you do consultation. And of course, I put in the chat data, and I'm curious how you present that data and whether or not is there a complication for those individuals in understanding the mounds of data that's coming at them, and are they swimming and they can't see, or is it a lack of understanding of what data they should be looking at to be more aware? Or a combination?
I mean, yeah. So you're bringing up a really good point because it's what we do is humanly impossible, because we reference each claim against every other claim. And I mean, if you imagine like being able to keep so number one, being able to look at like, let's say 100,000 claims, and then being able to keep all of them in your mind, and then being able to, as you're looking at every other claim, to look for patterns. And I mean, that's not physically possible. Regardless if you have like one person or a million people going over the claims, is just not doable. So a lot of times payers will deny things without, even if everything is perfect on the hospital side or on the provider side. Let's say, it could be in that doctor's office, it could be, a urgent care center, hospital, et cetera. But because the rules are so gray that even if the hospital or the doctor does everything perfectly, the claim could still be denied initially or underpaid. And so when it's bounced back, the code or the reasoning behind it is very vague, like needs more documentation. And then you're like, what document? Like it has everything what are you like? What could it possibly need? Right. And so without us, the hospital has no idea a lot of times what to actually do about the claim, because it's like, well, from their perspective, it's done, great. And so, yeah, I think in this instance, it's probably, I'm sure they have a lot of data. It's more of just like not having, a lot of times it's just not having any actionable data or really any insight into why things are denied or underpaid, especially for underpaid claims too, because the idea behind those is, let's say if I underpay a claim by $5 or $10, if that happens 1,000 times, or 10,000 times, whatever, like the hospital isn't going to go over, isn't going to take the time or the resources to go after like $5 each time.
Right.
But then there's probably a common reason for for these certain claims to be denied. So we can show them what that reason is, and then they can fix it and then stop that from being the case going forward. So essentially, after working with us, so we take 30% of whatever they actually recover. So there's no upfront cost. And when we give them the results, they just online dashboard with all of these different claims on there. Essentially, once they fix what we tell them, every month they'll have less and less denied and underpaid claims.
I love that model, Sam, that you're doing the work and you're saying we're at risk here. If we don't save you money, we don't make any. I think that's great.
You're almost a collection agency for derelict health plan. Guys who don't pay the bills. But my experience with patients is that they don't appeal claims denials on themselves because they seem to assume that a human being actually reviewed their claim and there was something wrong with it. And there's no human being on the other end. There's just somebody with a clicker on their computer screen because the claim came up like either red, green, or yellow. And if it came up red, they just deny it. Boom. And who's setting the switches in the computer is somebody else, high up. And they're denying claims left and right, and people don't appeal them. And when they do appeal them, sometimes the doctor has to get involved, and they demand that you have a conversation with the medical director. I had a patient who had sciatica and needed an MRI because they needed surgery, and I submitted the stuff and it got denied. I never get denied, so I could not understand what went wrong. I get an appeal with the medical director, and I'm talking to him for 5-10 minutes, and then discover, oh, I left a word out. And I said, this is like the secret decoder ring you get in the Cracker Jack box. Tell me what the secret password is, and I'll tell you that I needed that. And he said, well, of course, if there was actually some motor loss, then I would say yes. I said, well, there is. I put it in my notes. Didn't you read them? And of course, no, I didn't really read them. Didn't see that piece. So I used to tell patients there's a third level. After you've appealed past the medical director, there's an outside company under Obamacare that has to review this stuff. And if you go to the third level of appeal, you always win because their job is to do the opposite of what the insurance company did. In other words, approve claims that the insurer denied. That's their reason for being. And almost nobody appeals this stuff.
Well, most patients don't. They assume that the decisioning is correct, right?
Right.
Or
Right.
they don't know how or have the energy and the fight in them.
It's the same as they assume their local hospital, local doctor is quality. They assume quality, they assume uniformity, they assume correctness.
They assume patient first.
Right. And then people claim that they want to make this a consumer-driven healthcare system, but people don't act like consumers when they're sick.
Yeah.
They're patients, not the same thing.
Yeah.
They're living on trust because they don't know how to choose anything.
Yeah. I have such a challenge with the terminology of consumer. We are consumers if I go to Rite Aid to buy Band-Aids. Yeah, that's a consumer. But if I'm going to my hospital for care, I don't, especially if I am in a rural area, my hospital is the only thing for me to go to. I'm not a consumer, I'm a patient.
Yeah. The minute you're sick, you're a patient, not a consumer.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I had this thought this morning. So I think I was looking at online, brought that up for me. And I saw the word consumer. And I was like, I'm not sure that's a great way to describe things. I don't know if I want to be a consumer. Like consumption almost resonates with gluttony, sort of with greed and excess. And well, there is some of that in healthcare along with scarcity. And it sort of, exists on both poles and not in between.
I think you've actually gotten to the core of what's wrong, Rachel, at least from my point of view. I view it as healthcare has become entirely transactional, as if you were buying groceries at the grocery store. You might be nice to the checkout clerk, but you don't really have a relationship.
Right.
And healthcare is supposed to be about caring relationships. And the people who are doing the caring all think that that's what they're doing. And they're being destroyed by transactions.
Well, the other thing that
Yeah.
I object to in regards to the word consumer is that just naturally in my mind comes along with, well, those who can pay have access to the Cadillac versus those who can't pay are going to get the bare minimum. And that's a problem to me. To me, that should be equated. Unless it's a non-urgent, it's a plastic surgery that you just want to have. To me, that's different than somebody has a coronary event. It should be equal in my mind.
And that just screams for data and for a good analysis and presentation, because it turns out that, if you go back to, let's say, 19th century England and Dickens, we have the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. The deserving poor, of course, are working. The undeserving poor, belong in the poorhouse or the workhouse. Guess what? The undeserving poor and the deserving poor still cost the same amount of money, whether you cover them or don't cover them. In fact, they probably cost more when they don't have coverage. It would save the society money if they covered everybody.
Well, isn't that what we're about to do, to identify people as undeserving poor and take away their access to care? And Rosanna, I just talked over you. I know you had something to say.
The point is, it's going to cost more.
I know.
It just screams for good data presentation, right?
Yes. Rosanna, how do we present that data?
Good question. And there was something Paul said, but then he just got going, and now I forgot what I was going to say with regard to what reminded me. But yeah, we do need to tell the story. Oh, I know what I was going to, this whole conversation about customer, it really, a consumer, I was thinking about you guys, it's really true because it's a service. And we don't think of ourselves as consumers of like the fire department's service or the police department's service, or it's a service. And now granted, those are government entities, but they are service driven. Like you need them when you need them. And there's generally one they're limited in a community, right? And they are part of that community infrastructure that we were talking about prior to the call, like about a hospital, a school, the police department. These are things that make up a community, and they're important. But they're very different, those kinds of things, than going to the store, because you have a very specific purpose and you have a service that's needed. And of course, it comes to your health. And I was thinking about the same thing. We don't really use the word consumer for these other integral services that we use in our community. Kind of an interesting terminology. And it really perpetuates the idea of profits. Really, that idea, really, consumerism really goes to the customer funnel and profit, right? If you're a consumer, kind of an interesting way to really, if we really need to change the language. Part of being a communication major and scholar is I'm fascinated by how words create reality, right? The language we use creates the reality that we share. So if we're talking about healthcare as consumer, then we are shaping it as a consumer-driven enterprise. We're shaping it for profit. Fascinating, really. I was just thinking I'd never really put those two things together in terms of how we talk about it. Really perpetuates the problem.
So you talked about the fire department, and it triggered because I just shared a post on the platform. John Silver talks about the public utility model for healthcare. The same idea. If we don't pay for the firemen to come, that I have to pay them to come. No, they just come. It's the same idea for healthcare. And he's really leaning in that. He's writing a book right now. So I just dropped that in the chat. And then Rachel, I saw you put your hand over your heart. I think something resonated with you.
Yes, the language that you use creates your reality. I think that so much. I work as a psychiatrist, and so I spend my day a little bit more in relationships and sort of thoughts, feelings, and the intersection of those, which I love. But I've come more and more to think about a lot of our reality is created by the stories that we tell ourselves, which is made up of the language that we use to tell them. What things do we pick out to connect together into a story, and what things do we leave out? And Rosanna, I had a question for you. I was just typing it out because I didn't want to interrupt everybody. But do you have any thoughts, or is this something you address in your course, about when you have data that doesn't measure, like that isn't an accurate measure of whatever you're trying to measure? Like, I know in psychiatry, that's a huge problem because we often just don't even understand, like people don't understand how or why they feel what they feel, or, what they feel even in a moment. And so our ability to measure that can be very limited. And we use these proxy measures that sometimes are quite poor.
Yeah, well, I 100% agree, right? I mean, we know data collection is equally as important to anything else. Again, part of being data savvy is where does the data come from? How was I collecting it? How was this survey created?
Mhm.
One of my things that I did years ago that kind of led me down the path of data was I actually created a measurement instrument for volunteer satisfaction. I created a measurement instrument for
Mhm.
volunteer job satisfaction, but that process of survey, spent 3 years of graduate school developing it.
Mhm.
Led me down the path of understanding the amount of work that goes into operationalizing a social concept. So, I
Yes.
used Earl Babby's, it's kind of like the Bible of social
Mhm.
science in terms of statistical measurement. But really, this
Mhm.
understanding that he says very funny, it's like we have to agree that these things don't exist, that like these constructs that we are. But
Mhm.
however, if we all can agree that this measures a part of it because it has been validated with data to measure a part of it,
Mhm.
but know that it can also have a different angle, right? So how you measure happiness, how you measure stuff, it
Right.
isn't, it has to be both reliable and valid, right? That we get consistent results and we're measuring the thing we're measuring. Validity is the hard thing to determine though, right? And that's where, are we measuring what we're measuring? And I think this has been part of the problem with patient experience data
Mhm.
that is being addressed because we have, decade of data when we talk about some of these questions. And yes, I mean, I think there's quality issues that relate to that experience, but then there's experience issues. And I think relatedly, we just saw a big shift, right, in how CAPS is capturing data for people entering
Mhm.
through the emergency department. We've known for years that our patients really have two different experiences. The patients who come in for a planned procedure have a very different patient experience than those who come in through the emergency department unexpected. And that's revealed in the data, but it took over a decade for them to adjust the question to actually capture experience. So to your
Yeah.
point, yeah, I think a lot of times we are using that. I think part of being data savvy is asking a question about the measurement and about the
Mhm.
tools. But I do think with time and data, we do know that there are measurement tools out there that are consistent, that they're reliable, and we know that
Mhm.
through differential predictive statistics, other people can show validity. But I think if you have a measurement instrument that is questionable like that, I mean, you're
Mhm.
garbage in, garbage out, right? Your decisions are data reduces uncertainty, but only if the data you're using to reduce that uncertainty can be trusted. So I agree. I think we have, and I
Yeah.
think I see it in my students that we live in a heightened sense of mistrust of data.
Yeah.
And that is a really big piece, a mistrust of data because we have so much of it. And we need to get past that too. And because those data literacy skills, when we measure people's life, those social constructs, we need to be really certain that we're really measuring the thing that we're measuring. It's not just some
Yeah.
pop quiz.
Honestly, though, that's what a high bar, though, because we are flooded with data all the time. Not all of it's good. It's not. We don't always have a good way to know. Like many people don't have the skills. If they had the skills, you don't have the time. It's inefficient to try to necessarily try to filter all of that. So you kind of take it all in and average it as it's all a little bit untrustworthy, and then that's sort of how we're creating our reality.
Yeah, trust is a big thing in the world of data. I think that's one of the biggest things around culture, around when
Mhm.
teaching around data culture is people and data. Because right now, a lot of what's happening, and I'm sure you've seen it, is there's
Mhm.
usually one or two people in an organization really pushing out the data, saying, "Here's what's important. Here's what we need to chase. Here is the metric,"
Mhm.
and other people are expected to go along. And that worked for years until we came to this space of data distrust. And I think that we really have now, we need to, Sutter Health in the Sacramento area. One of the
Mhm.
things I learned about them when I went to the Barrel Institute is they've recently democratized the data. They're working to get all
Mhm.
their leaders data literacy skills, data savvy skills to be
Mhm.
able to look at the HCAPS data themselves and be able to say, how do I interpret this? What do I think I should do with this data to move the needle? And that's a big
Mhm.
shift. That's a big shift to to trust your leaders to be able to read the data.
So YL
Yeah.
came on video because I know the topic you brought up in regards to
That's the topic I was
HCAPS.
going.
He said, "Oh boy."
Just to follow up, thank you all, by the way. Just to follow up on that conversation with Rachel and Rosanna,
Mhm.
it's not just an overwhelming amount of data. It's also um, delayed data. So and there's a big gap between acquiring the data and acting on it, and then seeing the result of that action. Um, I've been looking into this very closely lately, and it's staggering, really, because when you send out a survey to people, and I'm biased because I work with this. When you send out a survey to people that takes 6 months to fill out, or for enough people to answer you, and then it takes you 6 months to read it, and then it takes you 3 years to implement any action, it's not relevant anymore. Also, you're sending out your surveys to very specific subset of people who don't represent everybody, and then you're trying to implement solutions on everybody based on those few that answer. So there's that piece of it. The other piece is when we talk about patient experiences and we talk about data from patient experiences that's ideally meant to improve future patient experiences, most of what we do is implement what we think is better for the patients. It's not let's ask them what they want and do what they want. So there's also that part of it. And third, in the academic circles, when you talk about survey research, it's one of the lower tier aspects of research because inherently it's not very well trusted because of all the things that I talk about. It's not representative of everybody. It's littered with biases, the kind of survey research. So in order to utilize patient voices to enhance patient experiences, we should probably be looking at it a little bit differently and trying to elevate that data in a way that's more relevant to the patients and more accessible to the policymakers.
Oh, this
That's a bit about
conversation,
it.
I would love to let it continue. I am going to have to go. We took networking conversations off these events. However, you are all members of HRC. Let's extend this to our Ruckus Exchange on Friday. Go ahead and come and let's continue this conversation. But for now, what I want to do is give a very special thank you to Rosanna and Sam for joining us today. Love what you shared, the insights that you bring, but the passion behind why you're doing what you're doing. And I just celebrate that you truly are ruckus makers. You have said, yes, I can contribute to making a difference, and you're actively out there doing it. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks,
Thank you
Denise.
all.
And thanks
Thank
to
you, Denise.
everybody
Thanks
else who
everyone for
joined.
joining.
Yeah,
Thank you.
excellent. Take care. My best to you.
Ciao, arrivederci.
Sam, do you want
Sam,
to?
introduce yourself. That'd be great.
Me? Well, I'm an entrepreneur who happens to be a doctor, and my overall goal is to help transform healthcare. And I'm doing that by operations consulting for hospitals, as well as helping them with the revenue cycle, especially with payer audits. And ultimately, our goal is to buy hospitals and create our own healthcare system to make healthcare not suck.
Nice. So where are you buying healthcare
hairy,
systems?
audacious goal.
Right. It really is.
Sorry, Rosanna, you were asking where are they buying?
Yeah. Where are you focusing your efforts?
Honestly, just all over the U.S. I mean, let's say if we had our pick, it would probably be in the Midwest, like because we're in Ohio, in Columbus. But overall, honestly, it could be anywhere in the U.S. Rural hospitals are kind of going out of business all over the place. So really, it's because it's the point is to help communities thrive. There's really no reason that rural communities and rural hospitals can't thrive. Most of them who go out of business don't go out of business because of like population reasons. It seems like mostly it's because of just really bad management.
Yeah, and there's a lot of hospitals closing. It is kind of scary. California. Where are you located out of, Sam?
Columbus, Ohio.
Ohio. Yeah. California, we have quite a few of our rural hospitals have closed, and it's really creates an issue for the people, particularly, you have birth is one definitely creates birthing issues and issues with mortality rates for sure. And like I always say, gosh, when I get older, I don't think I don't want to be a senior living in a rural area because I won't get to the hospital in time if I'm having an issue. It's a real problem.
Yep.
Yeah. Maternity deserts are a thing now. Yeah. And it's, and to me, hospitals are kind of like community centers, or they could be anyway, or should be. And it's.
Yes. Yeah, I was just having that
it's-
conversation with somebody the other day that hospitals are part of the infrastructure of a community. I was actually in Hawaii visiting my daughter
wow.
a couple of weeks ago, just like a week and a half ago. I was in Hawaii, and there was a huge farmers market there in Waimanalo at the Adventist Health Hospital. And they were saying that there's not a lot that goes on in that kind of rural part of Oahu. And so, but they actually do a lot of health. And I was like talking about how important that is, like to have the hospital and every, just like you need a police department, a fire department, a school, your church, the essentials of a community include a hospital because it's a
Yeah.
beacon of wellness, not just for sickness, right? I think that's so important. That's a noble cause you have in doing
Thanks.
this.
Yeah.
That's big. That's a big undertaking.
I mean, we're
Rosanna?
all patients, right? So go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to make sure because we've got the 10 minutes. I was going to, Rosanna, let you introduce, and then I just want to do the administrative stuff, and then we can dive in if we've got some more time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Sam, I think either you're really smart or you're really crazy, or you're both.
Crazy is probably the, yeah.
Oh, it's such a huge challenge, right? What I love this group. Thank you, Denise, for bringing together people who just I think at willing to push the edges of things. It's great. Big thinkers, big thinkers. It's exciting. Not small thinkers. Got to think big. I help leaders in data in healthcare move the needle in data communication. I know you and I have not connected on that yet, Sam, but I know that's something of interest to you as well. I have a background in data. I have a background in teaching communication. I have a background in healthcare, and I just ended up having this kind of perfect confluence of bringing those three things together to really help people communicate more effectively with data. So not talking about deep dive, technical dashboards, but more the everyday decision makers and trying to make data more meaningful, more accessible, and people less afraid of working with it, because data is a superpower. It can be a superpower if you understand how to use it effectively, the right questions to ask of it, and how to communicate it. So that's my goal, is to help people really push their own skill sets in how to communicate more effectively with data. That's kind of in a nutshell. There's a lot to that, though, because it's not just the visualization. There's the narrative. There's even the culture in which the data is shared.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, there's so many aspects. So depending on where somebody is within their own organizational journey, just accessing data or having people trust data is you need that before you can even try to move the needle on it, right? So it depends on where. If they already trust the data, now you have a totally different relationship with how to communicate it. So
well, and I love
that goes
how you
Sorry.
talk about are you trying to convince, or right? It's what is it that you need to do with the data? Are they already convinced and now you're moving them forward to action? Or yeah.
Yeah, and the more data we have, I mean, we're so watching it so much of the time. You push data in front of people, and immediately they just kind of like turn like, nah, the eyes glaze over, and it's just like data schmata. That really, it doesn't really move or change people's behaviors. I mean, if data changed people's behaviors, we'd be a whole different world.